This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with KC Grifant about her new collection, Shrouded Horror. KC Grifant is an award-winning writer of horror, fantasy, science fiction, and Weird West stories. Her short fiction has appeared in podcasts, magazines, games, and Stoker-nominated anthologies. Her Weird Western novel, Melinda West, Monster Gunslinger, ranked number 1 in Amazon new releases for Western horrors. In addition to writing, she's the founder and co-chair of the Horror Writers Association San Diego chapter, a short story instructor, and a member of numerous writing organizations, including the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. In between her day job as a nonfiction science communicator, she chases 2 small children and drinks far too much coffee. Welcome to the show, Casey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I have an icebreaker question for you. Who is your favorite X-Man?
Ooh, oh my gosh, what a good question. I love this. Okay, well, I have a few. It depends on the context, of course, right? But if I had to pick just one, I'm going to go with Morph.
Not the joke answer.
I loved Morph when I first saw that character in the original X-Men animated TV show in the 90s. He had this anguish and this story that was so heartbreaking, right? He was trying to save his friends and he got brainwashed by Mr. Sinister and had this very Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scenario. And I don't know why, but as a teenager, that really resonated with me. I would watch those episodes so many times that I knew all the lines by heart. So I was thrilled when the character came back in the new X-Men that came out this year.
This one's for you, Morph.
I was going to throw Morph out there as a goof. Can't believe you went for it. So in the introduction to this collection, Shrouded Horror, Tales of the Uncanny, is that a shout out to the Uncanny X-Men?
Well, sure. Yeah, let's say it is.
Okay. In the introduction to this collection, you talk a bit about your time in New England and your time in New York, and those are definitely reflected in the stories. Did you move to New England later in life, or were those early years?
So I grew up on the East Coast, but more mid-Atlantic. I grew up in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, which everybody's like, oh, Delaware, weird. But it's very suburban, very kind of boring, small town. And then I moved to New York for school, for undergraduate, lived in Manhattan for a bit after that, and then continued northwards and went to Boston for many years for graduate school and then for my early professional life. That was a little too far north for me. The winters were exceptionally long, cold, icy, slushy. And so California became kind of more appealing, and I had always wanted to try the West Coast. So a job opportunity came up in San Diego, and I had never really visited San Diego. I didn't know much about it, but beach, California, let's try it. And it turned out great. I've been here 9 years now, and it's very different than the East Coast, obviously, vegetation, the landscape. So it's been really refreshing to come out here. But I loved my time in New England. Boston is historical, unique. It's got so many different vibes going on. And yes, a lot of my short stories are inspired by strange moments in New England and also in New York. So that sense of setting definitely has inspired a few tales.
And then your Weird Western stories, are those inspired by your move out west?
Yep, that's exactly what happened. I came out west and actually started playing this competitive card game based on the Deadlands universe, which is kind of a classic Weird West world. Became pretty involved in that community. I ended up writing some of the official card game stories, and I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to write my own Weird Westerns. And plus being in kind of the desert Southern California landscape was very inspiring in that regard. So I wrote short stories featuring my main character, Melinda West, who's sort of a gender swapped stoic cowboy archetype. Her partner, Lance, who is the charismatic, easygoing guy. The short stories were published in various magazines and pretty well received. So then I thought, let me try a novel. And that went better than I had imagined. It was very well received. I'm working on the second one now. It comes out next year. And I also have some other things bubbling up from that weirdest universe, including a card game that's going to be coming out next year.
I saw that there was a card game in the works, and I was very intrigued. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny how it came together. My husband, he played Magic competitively for many years, Magic the Gathering, and he's played every board game under the sun. It's his passion. So he had designed this card game a few years ago that was the spin on Texas Hold'em, but sort of a fast-paced version where you can attack the other players with these card mechanics. And he had play tested it for years, and it was kind of just sitting on the shelf. And it needed a flavor to it, right? So we thought, why not use some of the characters from my stories? Because Texas Hold'em and Old West, they kind of go hand in hand a little bit, right? At least in our mindset. So anyway, we started putting those characters to the cards, and we found an artist. She's based in Canada, and she's almost done the art for all the cards, and it looks fantastic. It is so cool to see those characters come to life in these various cards. It's all indie developed. We're funding it ourselves. We'll be doing a Kickstarter soon, but I'm really excited. It looks beautiful. The game is pretty fun. People that we played it with seem to enjoy it. And it's just, fast-paced, 10-minute card game with friends. So we're excited.
If anyone plays against you, are you going to have an unfair advantage because you know the characters and the lore and the mechanics?
That's a good question. I'm pretty competitive when I play games, so I think that would maybe be my advantage.
Do you have any special edition cards up your sleeve that you can just whip out?
Not yet. We actually have some in mind, depending on how the Kickstarter goes.
An expansion pack?
Yep.
A special tier, which is just you and you alone get these special ace cards?
I would love to do a holographic card or those foil cards you see.
That would be so fun.
Would be fun.
So I'm a fan of Delaware. I've spent a lot of time there. I'm going there next week. My family has always visited that part of the shoreline to visit relatives and to just relax on the beach. How did you get into horror from the muddy lowlands of Delaware?
So it's kind of funny because I never thought of myself as a horror fan or horror author actually until I moved to San Diego. So until I was an adult. But I had always enjoyed creepy, kind of unsettling stories. So growing up, Goosebumps, Christopher Pike, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Just that kind of episodic, creepy storytelling, especially with a twist at the end. I was obsessed with Tales from the Crypt and Twilight Zone, these stories that really kind of favor that twist in your expectation, that ending that makes you go, oh, wow, I did not see that coming. Frankenstein, I wrote notebooks full of kind of fan fiction. Frankenstein, that's bizarre, right?
But you didn't think you were a horror fan.
No, I didn't. I really kind of self-identified more with sci-fi because I was really into science and I was a scientist for a while. And then when I moved to San Diego, I was looking for a writers group. And in my research, I came across the Horror Writers Association. And in looking, the closest chapter was in LA, which from San Diego is kind of an annoying drive. So I thought, let me see if I can just start a chapter here. And I did, and it grew. And we have a good number of active members. And we actually just hosted Stoker Con this past year. So that's been really great because in starting that, I found my people, so to say, and I had not really felt that in other writers groups. I'd done kind of general writing classes. I had done some sci-fi fantasy and it was all fine, but it wasn't until I connected with horror writers when I felt, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And part of it is that I never really enjoyed the super graphic horror or, the slashers, they just make me really anxious. So I think that's why it took me a while to understand horror is the spectrum, right? There's so many different aspects of horror and so many ways to enjoy horror, and it's not the same for everyone.
I'm kind of stuck on this notebooks full of fan fiction about Frankenstein. I want to know more. Is that going to see the light of day in any form?
I've saved all my notebooks.
Good for you.
The only thing I remember, it was done in the letter writing style, right? So
awesome.
It was from Victor and just kind of all these different takes on where Frankenstein could have gone. I remember watching a play of Frankenstein, I think it was in 6th grade, and that just actually similar to Morph, right? Victor's anguish over his creation and the kind of good guy, bad guy scenario taking place inside of him really resonated with me. And plus the monster's own anguish. It was just so engaging that I had to write fan fiction for a while.
So Casey, This is a sumptuous feast of fiction in Shrouded Horror. We could go on all day, but instead we're going to focus our sights a little bit, and we're going to pick out 2 pairs of stories to discuss with maybe some glancing references to the other offerings. So the first one I want to bring under the microscope is Just Another Apocalypse.
Yeah, so this one is a pretty short tale, and what happens is the main character is picked up while hitchhiking, and it's during a zombie apocalypse. The characters are pretty jaded. They've been through, pandemics and whatnot. So for me, that was the interesting piece coming in. Like, okay, it's a zombie apocalypse, but nobody's impressed, right? It's just another disaster they have to deal with. So we have this character hitchhiking with this couple, and they're, in their early 20s trying to figure out what to do. They stop at a gas station and then have this encounter. That is kind of the central part of the story. And then there's also a twist that I think hopefully catch people by surprise.
These characters are in their early 20s, and I think a lot of your characters are in the early 20s. What is it about that time of life that you find so ripe for exploration?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for a lot of people, that is your time of self-exploration, right? You're kind of setting off as an adult. You're making these new relationships. You're figuring out who you are in the world. For me, it was a pretty pivotal decade. I moved around a lot. I had a lot of different careers and experiences. So I tap into those feelings, right, from those times when I'm writing these characters. And in this case, I also wanted to set up that contrast of how hopeless the younger generation is feeling in light of everything going on in the world, right? We have climate change, we have pandemics, we have politics. I mean, goodness, it's like so depressing to be in your young adults and you see no path forward, career-wise, environmental-wise. So I wanted to capture that in the story, contrasting the older character that they encounter at the gas station.
This idea of an identity in crisis or in transition, I think, threads through a lot of your stories. There are stories that are set just in a person's head, grappling with the various versions of themselves or various paths to take, but also you like to play with reality, I find, in a lot of these stories. People should check out the adaptation that appeared on Pseudopod, which was really excellent with some really good wraparound commentary. What was it like?
That was awesome. That's my first story on Pseudopod, so it was especially exciting, right? It's one of the premier horror podcasts, if not the premier one. So I was so excited to see what they would do with the story, and I was not disappointed. It's so well done. And then they actually talk about the Shrouded Horror collection afterwards and give a pretty good analysis of it. That was great too.
I thought that Just Another Apocalypse pairs pretty nicely with the U-Train.
Yes. So the U-Train opens with this group of characters stuck waiting for the subway in New York. And this taps into my many, many times waiting for a subway that feels like it's never going to come, right? Especially if it's the middle of the night or there's construction. So these characters are waiting and then they realize there's something wrong. They try to leave the subway. They can't. Something's happening. Their memories are altered. I think I'll leave it there in terms of not spoiling it, but it's definitely a story that kind of has this feeling, I would say a little bit of claustrophobia, right? You're in the subway, you're waiting, you're with these random strangers, something's going on, and together they have to figure it out, and it begins to come to light that they each kind of have this moment in their past that they need to talk about.
This particular group of characters that are randomly thrown together waiting for this train, are these archetypes of passengers that you have waited on dirty tile benches in windy New York subway stations with?
For sure. There are so many interesting people who live in New York. Yes. So the main character is this kind of grumpy New York guy who's really into conspiracy theories, and he's, I forget his exact age, maybe in his 60s or so. He plays chess in the park and he's just like on his kind of time schedule. He's somewhat misogynistic, right? Just this like archetype guy that you maybe don't want to spend a lot of time with. And then we have kind of 2 younger characters and then a businessman. So yeah, they're each like a little capsule of these various people you might see in New York. For U Train, I was really excited that Slay House Publishing did a full audio production of that story with the voice actors for the 4 characters, the sound effects. It came out so well and it's so creepy. So if anyone wants to check that out, it's free to listen to at the Slay House Publishing podcast.
Having had 2 stories from this collection adapted into really high quality audio, A, does that make you want to see every story in the collection adapted? And B, does that linger in your mind a little bit when you write new stories? You're like, how would this sound? What's the soundscape of this?
I would say it's such a thrill to hear your story brought to life in audio. It's very similar to seeing art around your story, right? The cover art or character art, someone else's interpretation of those characters in that story, I don't think will ever get old. And it also helps you reflect in new ways about the story too, right? When you see people's different takes. As far as writing, I actually don't write with the audio in mind. I might someday if I'm writing for a specific audio recording place, but generally it's really just more about the sentences and what is that core story. And actually Unrest was also produced in audio, which we're going to talk about later. So you might enjoy listening to that one too.
100%. So the next 2 we're going to talk about are The Circus King and my personal favorite, Unrest. But first, The Circus King.
The Circus King opens with this character who finds themselves as the king of the circus, and they don't really know how they got there or what they're doing, and they feel compelled to run this circus that, you know, people are coming in, they're watching, they're clowns, they're acrobats, but it's a, I would say, pretty creepy undertone because this character is almost trapped in this role of being the ringmaster, and they're compelled to, you know, greet the audience and instruct the circus performance. And over time, this character is trying to understand their situation and try to get out of it. And that's sort of where it starts. There's also strange clowns. And then I will also say a giant hole starts to open up in the middle of the circus. And that is what kind of prompts the story to take action.
This is a very surreal story, but very deftly handled because there are questions of identity and memory, but also there is something very concretely otherworldly going on. This feels to me like perhaps your love of Are You Afraid of the Dark meets cosmic horror?
Yeah, I would say that's a good mix. I would say this story too is definitely more dreamlike and, as you say, surreal than some of the other tales. And actually, I didn't know if this story would be well received because it is more dreamlike. It's more about the vibe. And it was originally published in a small magazine. And, you know, I think people enjoyed it, but it didn't really get a lot of attention. And now that it's in the collection, oddly enough, I'm finding a lot of people say it's their favorite or they say it's their least favorite. So it seems to evoke this like love hates, which is great, right? That's what you want.
Strong reaction.
Mm-hmm.
I have to give you kudos because there is so much going on, but it is such a small, self-contained story. I don't feel like anything is over-explained. I don't feel like I'm left wanting more answers. It's very satisfying. The way you layer in the surreal, the psychological, the cosmic horror, and there is a plot. It moves. And it has a very, very definitive before and after. It's kind of the total package. Bravo. Bravo for the Circus King.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually, every time I really think about this story or reread it, I'm just filled with this cosmic dread. Like, even though I won't give away the ending, but it's sort of a mixed ending. But I feel so kind of anxious for that character. Mm-hmm. That it's every time I reread it, it stresses me out a bit.
And it's so much more than the trappings of the circus. Mm-hmm. In a lesser writer's hands, it could just be like, hey, clowns are creepy. And that's really not the focus of this at all. It's about the carnival atmosphere as a whole, and then the way you twist that into a source of cosmic dread. I really dug it.
Thanks. I'm glad you like that one. That would be a cool one to hear audio, maybe someday.
I think this will pair very nicely with my favorite in the collection, Unrest. So, mild spoilers ahead for Unrest. Give us a spoilery log line for this one.
It starts with the narrator, who appears to be this young woman on a date with this guy, and their car stalls out in front of a cemetery, and they're going to have to walk through the cemetery. But we find out she knows that he planned this. They start walking through the cemetery, and it's eventually revealed that he has very nefarious intentions for her. But what he doesn't know is she is not a mere human, and she is actually kind of there to take care of him, to deal with him. But despite her not being human, she has very human-like feelings for him. She has fallen in love with him, and she wants him to do better. She wants him to transcend this very deadly tendency he has. He's not a good guy at all. So she's sort of conflicted, right? She has to deal with him, but she wants him to rise up, and that's sort of where it goes. And just a little background for that. That story was actually inspired by Michael Jackson's Thriller, the music video. It started as a writing exercise, which is take the initial scene of that music video.
Honestly, we're out of gas.
And I thought, well, the guy kind of turning to a monster, that's really typical, or doing something nefarious. So what if she is the actual monster? And how could that be twisted? And that was how it started.
The first twist is that she knows what he's up to. And the second twist is that she is actually an agent of revenge for his former victims. And you could have just left it at that. But I really, really appreciated the texture you brought to it, because as a representative of all his former lovers, she cannot help but love him. Even though she sees him for who he is and everything he's done, she resists her own reason for being, her mission. She wants him to change and get away, and maybe even she can get away from the reason why she was created, to enact this vengeance. Maybe they could learn to love each other without hurting each other. The push and pull between these things, and the way that you bring the environment of the cemetery to life, and all the subtle and not so subtle ways it is goading her on, it is chastising her to be about her business, and her reluctance to do it. There's so many wonderful little textures in this story that it immediately made it my favorite of the collection.
Thank you. Yeah, I think related to that aspect, it's very parallel to how people sometimes feel in an abusive relationship, but then also any relationship that's not working, right? You want the person to change. You have this hope, however unrealistic it is, that they will change for you, that you can help them. And the spectrum of that is pretty extreme. You see it in abusive relationships, but you also just see it in people who are in not the greatest relationship, right? And I've seen this so many times with, friends, where they're just waiting for their partner to change, whether it's male or female or, whatever. Something's not working. And from the outside, you can see, you're going to have to break it off. You're going to, like this character, she's going to have to fulfill her mission. But there's that human hope of, oh, why can't it work out? If only it could work out. Let me do everything I can to make it work. But that's usually not always the case, right?
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. You said this has been adapted to audio as well?
Yes, this one was made into an audio story that published in Tales to Terrify a few months ago, and they did a wonderful job.
Fantastic. I'm going to seek that one out immediately. We are Tales to Terrify buddies.
Oh, nice. They're great.
Yeah.
I love their work.
There are other subgenres and themes running through this collection, among them being eco-horror. What is your fascination with the environment and how it relates to horror?
Such a kind of fundamental horror that we're all facing, right? And none of us can escape. So sometimes it's hard to write about it because it's too real and too stressful, especially when you think about, for those of us with kids or anyone who just wants to leave the world a better place, it's very disheartening. I feel like eco horror kind of creeps here and there. I don't necessarily intend to write it, but I'll read a fact. For example, I was reading about how jellyfish are becoming more prominent in oceans, right, taking over. So that inspired From Sea to Shining Sea, which is, what happens if these jellyfish continue to take over and evolve. and it's actually a spin-off of a longer story I'd written. And then for What Storms Bring, I was in Boston when Superstorm Sandy hit, so that was the inspiration for that story, which is just, this giant storm is coming, you live alone in the city, this feeling of isolation, impending doom. And I have to say this last year too, even the last few months with all the strange weather we've seen across the country, that's only getting worse. I mean, very unfortunate for us, but also ripe storytelling for horror writers.
There's so much more we didn't get a chance to touch upon. Obviously, I recommend everyone go out and check out this collection. But Casey, what are you working on next?
I have a few projects. I'm about to pitch a ghost story / haunted house novella, which is actually kind of based on Better Haps, which is in Shrouded Horror. So it's a story where there's this bed and breakfast and something's wrong with the mirrors and people start to have strange experiences. That short story was so well received that I have created a novella around it with various other characters and their encounters at this Airbnb. So that's hopefully will find a home soon. I have my second monster gunslinger novel coming out next year that's featuring Melinda West and her friends in this alternate Old West where they have to fight monsters. That one's called Melinda West and the Gremlin Queen. And then I have this Monster Gunslinger game coming out and a few anthologies coming out this year. And then one more big project I'll be able to announce probably in November.
My final question is, what was the victory party like post Stoker Con?
Wow. Well, Stoker Con, we were so exhausted. Me and my two co-organizers, Dennis Crosby and Sarah Faxon, we had worked well over a year planning Stoker Con in San Diego. It went pretty smoothly. We were surprised. We, in the middle of StokerCon said, "This is going really smoothly. Is this normal?" Which was a good sign, right? So a few hiccups here and there, but our post party, we actually didn't celebrate until this past weekend. A few of the chapter members went out just for a casual lunch and drinks and kind of recap the experience. But overall, it was wonderful to see so many people enjoying San Diego. StokerCon is my favorite conference of the year, aside from San Diego Comic-Con. Those are my two top ones. But I love StokerCon because you see old friends, you meet new friends. It's such a welcoming vibe. There's a lot of offerings in those days, a lot of things to see and do. So I was really happy and honored to play a part in organizing it this past year.
It was my first StokerCon. I had an absolute blast. I saw you multiple times over the weekend, but I didn't want to approach because I could only imagine that you were running around doing 1,000 things at once.
Yeah, that was pretty much the state of it. I feel like I was just zipping back and forth down that hallway and taking care of stuff. But I'm glad to hear it was a good experience. I think for a lot of first timers, which is really awesome to hear as the organizer.
And where can our listeners find you online?
My website is kcgrifant.com. I have a monthly newsletter. I'll be doing some giveaways for the new book there, actually. And then I'm on pretty much all of the social networks as KC Grifant.
Can you spell Grifant just real quick?
Yes, Grifant.
Excellent. Casey, thanks for hanging out, and I guess I'll see you down at Comic-Con.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.